The press machine screamed like a wounded animal when it jammed at 2:47 a.m. I was home, dead asleep, when my phone started buzzing with that ringtone I'd heard 1,000 times before: plant emergency. 22 years of building Ford F-150s, and you learn to tell the difference between a regular breakdown and something that's about to cost somebody their job. This wasn't regular. My name is Stanley Rodriguez. I'm 49 years old, and I've been running assembly operations at Ford Rouge plant in Detroit for the past 22 years. Before that, I did 2 tours in Iraq, learned how to keep complex systems running under pressure. After my wife Patricia and I had our son Cole, this job became everything to our family. But to understand why I was sitting in my truck at 3 a.m., watching my phone explode with missed calls while my coworkers panicked inside, I need to go back 3 days to the meeting that changed everything. The conference room on the 3rd floor smelled like stale coffee and broken promises. I walked in expecting my annual review and maybe some talk about the operations manager position that opened up when Bill Martinez retired. After 22 years of keeping our production line running smooth, maintaining the highest safety ratings in the plant, and training half the supervisors currently on the floor, I figured I'd earned the shot. Brad Hoffman sat at the head of the table, new corporate VP brought in 6 months ago to modernize operations. Next to him was his son Dylan, 24 years old, fresh MBA from Stanford, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most of my guys made in 2 weeks. Kid had that look you see in people who think they understand manufacturing because they read about it in business school. Brad didn't waste time with pleasantries. Stan, I've reviewed your performance metrics. You're solid, reliable, but I don't think you have the qualifications for the manager position. The words hit like a sucker punch. 22 years of making sure this line produced America's best-selling truck, keeping workers safe, handling every crisis that came through those doors. I felt my jaw tighten, the same feeling I got in Baghdad when command told us our supply convoy was delayed and we'd have to make do with half rations. What qualifications am I missing? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Military training teaches you not to let emotions drive the conversation. We need innovation, fresh thinking. Dylan here has some exciting ideas about optimizing throughput and eliminating redundancies. Brad smiled like he was doing me a favor. He'll be taking the operations manager position. Starting salary will be 25% above your current rate. Don't worry though, you'll be working closely with him. Your experience will be valuable in helping him implement improvements. I looked at Dylan. Kid was nodding like he'd already rehearsed his acceptance speech. Meanwhile, I'm thinking about Cole's medical bills sitting on my kitchen counter, $850 a month for insulin and testing supplies, his college fund we'd already drained for his continuous glucose monitor, and the promotion I'd been counting on to help us get back on solid ground. What kind of optimizations? I asked. Dylan leaned forward, eager to show off. Well, we've identified several inefficiencies in the current production protocols. Too many safety breaks, too much inspection redundancy. We can increase line speed from 60 to 75 units per hour and reduce quality checkpoints by 40%. I felt my safety glasses slip down my nose. This kid was talking about cutting safety protocols like he was trimming fat from a budget spreadsheet. Those weren't numbers on a screen. They were procedures that kept people from getting their hands crushed by press machines or electrocuted by robotic welders. Those redundancies exist because this is dangerous work, I said slowly. Every checkpoint catches something the previous one might miss. That's how you keep a 99.2% safety rating. That's legacy thinking. Dylan replied with the confidence only someone who'd never seen a workplace accident could have. Modern lean manufacturing shows that streamlined processes actually improve safety by reducing complexity. I looked at Brad. You're putting someone in charge of operations who's never worked a day on the floor. Dylan has an MBA from Stanford and 18 months of consulting experience with operational excellence. He brings exactly the kind of fresh perspective we need to compete with the Mexico plants. That's when I understood what was really happening. This wasn't about qualifications or innovation. This was about Brad setting his kid up with a management position while I did the actual work. Dylan would get the credit and the salary while I handled the problems his optimizations would create. But here's what they didn't know about me. When you've spent 8 years in the Army and 22 years on an assembly line, you learn when to argue and when to adapt. This wasn't the time to argue. I stood up, adjusted my safety glasses, and gave them both a polite nod. Well, I guess we'll see how those improvements work out. I walked out before Brad could launch into his speech about exciting new directions and collaborative opportunities. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Patricia going through Cole's medical expenses. Test strips, insulin, doctor visits, the monthly bills that never seemed to get smaller despite our insurance. Cole was upstairs doing homework, probably checking his blood sugar levels between math problems like he'd been doing since he was 12. "Dad, you okay?" Cole asked, coming down for a glass of water. "You look like someone told you the F-150 line was moving to China." "Smart kid, just thinking about work stuff, son." "The promotion thing, you mentioned it a couple weeks ago." "Yeah, didn't get it." Cole set down his water glass. "Someone with more experience?" I almost laughed. "Someone with an MBA and a famous last name." "That's garbage, Dad. You know that plant better than anyone, out of the mouths of teenagers. Sometimes knowing how to do the job isn't enough, Cole. Sometimes it's about who you know. So what are you going to do?" That was the question. What was I going to do? I'd spent 22 years being the guy everyone came to when things went wrong. The one who stayed late to fix problems, came in early to prevent them, worked weekends when crises hit. I'd been keeping this line running on my back, and they just told me I wasn't qualified to officially do what I'd been doing all along. I pulled out my job description, the actual one, not the expanded version I'd been living by. Really read it for the first time in years. "Dad? Yeah, son. Whatever you decide, I'm proud of you. You've always done right by people. Smart kid. Definitely got that from his mother's side." That night, lying in bed listening to the distant hum of the Rouge plant running its night shift, I made my decision. I was going to do exactly what they asked me to do. Nothing more, nothing less. Just my job as written, performed to the letter. Sometimes the best way to prove your worth isn't to argue about it. Sometimes you just step back and let people see what happens when you're not there to catch everything that falls. I showed up Monday morning at exactly 7 a.m., not 6:15 like usual. Not early enough to check the overnight production reports, handle the equipment issues that always cropped up, or brief the morning crew on potential problems. Just 7 a.m. sharp, like my job description specified. The break room felt different at that hour, quieter. Most of the early shift was already deep into their routines I'd helped establish over 22 years of being there before everyone else. But not today. I walked past the main production board where Miguel Santos, our shift supervisor, was staring at a stack of overnight incident reports with the confusion of someone trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. "Stan, thank God," he said without looking up. "We've got issues from night shift. Press 3's hydraulics are acting up again. The quality scanner crashed around midnight, and there's some kind of documentation error on the chassis units that came through at 0,500. I checked my watch, then pulled out my job description, the actual one I'd printed and highlighted the night before. Hydraulics' maintenance department. Submit a work order. IT handles scanner crashes and documentation errors go through quality control. Miguel looked at me like I'd started speaking Chinese. "But you always handle the hydraulics issue. You know that system better than maintenance does. Not according to my official responsibilities. Stan, what's going on? You feeling all right?" The truth was, I felt clearer than I had in months. For 22 years, I'd been carrying the weight of 3 different departments because it was easier than watching things fall apart. But that weight had a cost. Nights when I came home exhausted. Weekends spent thinking about work problems. The constant stress of being the person everyone expected to have all the answers. "I'm fine, Miguel. Just following proper procedures." I headed to my workstation and started on my actual assigned tasks. Production scheduling for my designated zones, safety compliance documentation for my specific areas, equipment inspection reports for the machinery under my direct supervision. It was strange how quiet my radio was. Usually by 7:30 I'd have fielded a dozen calls about problems that weren't technically mine, but that I'd solve anyway because it kept the line moving. Today, silence. Around 8:15, Dylan showed up for his first day as operations manager. Fresh haircut, brand new safety gear that still had the tags on it, and a tablet that looked like it cost more than most of my tools. He made a beeline for my station. "Stan, good morning. Ready for an exciting day of operational improvements?" "Morning, Dylan. What can I help you with?" Well, I wanted to start by reviewing our current throughput metrics and identifying bottlenecks for immediate optimization. I gestured to my computer screen. "My production reports are all up to date. Everything's in the system." "Great. And what about the overall line status? Any issues from the overnight shift?" "You'd need to check with the night shift supervisor for that. I wasn't here. Dylan's smile faltered just a bit, but don't you usually? I mean, Brad mentioned you typically handle the transition briefings. That was something I did voluntarily. It's not part of my official duties. Oh, okay. Well, who should I talk to about the hydraulics issue with Press 3? Miguel mentioned it's been ongoing. Maintenance department. Carlos Williams is our hydraulics specialist, and the scanner problems, IT department. Linda Walsh handles database issues. The documentation errors, quality control, Alex Turner's area. Dylan was typing notes frantically, his confidence evaporating with each answer. This is more compartmentalized than I expected. Most operations are when you follow the organizational chart. What Dylan was discovering, what his MBA program apparently hadn't taught him, was the difference between how organizations work on paper and how they actually function. On paper, every department had clear responsibilities and clean handoff procedures. In reality, most places only work because people like me spend their careers bridging the gaps between what departments are supposed to do and what actually needs to get done. By 9:30, the cracks were starting to show. I watched Dylan bounce between departments trying to get answers about problems that required the kind of institutional knowledge you don't learn from flowcharts. Miguel came by my station around 10 looking frustrated. Stan, Dylan asked me about the morning startup protocol. I told him it's not written down anywhere. You just handle it based on line conditions and production targets. Sounds like something the operations manager should document then, but you know that protocol better than anyone. You created it. I did on my own time, based on my own experience. Never got asked to make it official policy. Miguel stared at me for a long moment. This is about the promotion, isn't it? This is about doing my job. Nothing more, nothing less. Around 11:30, the first real crisis hit. Martinez from Press 3 called in. One of Dylan's optimization changes had increased line speed without adjusting the safety interlocks. Now we had a $2 million press machine running at unsafe parameters, and the union safety rep was threatening to shut down the entire line. My radio crackled. Dallin's voice, tight with stress. Stan, we have a situation at Press 3. Can you come take a look? Is it in my designated area? What? Press 3 is part of the main assembly line. This is urgent. Press 3 falls under Central Operations. I handle East Line Assembly. You should contact the Central Operations Supervisor, that's Miguel, and he said he needs someone with system experience. I looked at my job description again. My lunch break starts in 15 minutes. You'll need to wait for Miguel to handle it or address it yourself. The silence on the radio stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd given up. Finally. Fine. I'll figure it out. I went to lunch at exactly 11:45 like my schedule said. The cafeteria had a view of the production floor, and I could see Dylan down there with a cluster of supervisors, all of them looking up at Press 3, like it was some kind of alien technology. Martinez waved at me through the window. Good worker, been here 9 years. He knew what needed to be done, reset the safety parameters, recalibrate the pressure sensors, run a test cycle, basic stuff. But it required someone with authority to shut down production and approve the changes. I ate my sandwich and watched Dylan make phone calls, probably trying to reach Brad or maybe calling Miguel to see what the protocol was. What he should have been doing was taking charge, making the decision, accepting responsibility. But that's the thing about people who've never been in actual leadership positions. They think leadership is about having the right answer, when really it's about making decisions with incomplete information and living with the consequences. By 12:15, they'd gotten the situation sorted out. Miguel had come back early and handled it in about 10 minutes. But those 30 minutes of delay would cascade through the afternoon production schedule, creating problems that someone would have to solve, that someone used to be me. Today, it would be whoever was officially responsible. When I got back from lunch, Dylan was waiting at my station. His safety gear was askew, his shirt was damp with sweat, and he looked like someone who was beginning to understand the difference between theory and practice. Stan, I need to ask you something. Sure, how did you learn all this stuff? The protocols, the procedures, the relationships between departments. 22 years of showing up early, staying late, and caring more about getting things done than whose job it technically was. He nodded slowly. Brad mentioned you'd be helping me transition into the role. I'm happy to answer questions during my scheduled consultation hours. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 2 to 4 p.m. You can book time through the administrative assistant. Dylan stared at me like I'd told him the plant was moving to Mars. But what if there's an emergency? Then you handle it. That's what managers do. That afternoon, I watched the plant struggle with the kind of small problems I'd been solving invisibly for years. Nothing catastrophic, just the daily friction that accumulates when systems don't quite fit together the way they should. Dylan spent most of his time on phone calls trying to coordinate responses to issues that could have been prevented with a little foresight and institutional knowledge. At 4 p.m. exactly, I clocked out and headed for the parking lot. As I walked past the operations center, I could see Dylan still there, surrounded by reports, looking overwhelmed. Cole was doing homework when I got home, testing strips scattered across the kitchen table, next to his calculus book. How was the new job dynamic, Dad? Educational. For everyone involved. Cole looked up from his glucose meter. Think they're learning anything? We'll see. Sometimes people need to feel the weight of responsibility before they understand what it means to carry it. Tuesday morning brought our first real test. I arrived at 7 a.m. to find an overnight supervisor's report on my desk with a red priority flag, the kind that means somebody screwed up and we need damage control. The report was short, but telling Press 3's hydraulic system had completely failed at 3:20 a.m. The night crew had tried to implement Dylan's new streamlined repair protocol, but without proper safety authorization, they just shut the system down and flagged it for the morning shift. Press 3 was our heavy-duty unit, the one we used for the F-150's frame assembly that couldn't be handled by the standard equipment. According to the production schedule, we had 47 chassis units due to start processing at 8 a.m., and a Toyota contract delivery scheduled for Thursday that we couldn't afford to miss. My phone started ringing at 7:15. Miguel, Stan, we've got a problem. Press 3's down and we've got chassis coming through. What do you want me to do? I pulled up the equipment assignments on my computer. Press 3 isn't in my operational zone, Miguel. That's central line equipment. But you know the backup procedures better than anyone. You wrote most of them. I wrote them as suggestions on my own time. They were never officially adopted as policy. Come on, Stan. We need that press operational in 45 minutes. Then you need to contact maintenance and the central line supervisor. I'm sure they'll figure it out. The silence on the line told me everything. Miguel was realizing what Dylan had started to understand yesterday, that the unofficial system they'd been relying on was built entirely on my willingness to work outside my assigned responsibilities. At 7:30, Dylan called, Stan, I need you to take a look at the Press 3 situation. Maintenance says they need operational input before they can proceed. I'm scheduled for consultation hours Thursday afternoon. You can book a slot. This can't wait until Thursday. We've got Toyota units coming through. Then you'll need to handle it yourself or find someone else with appropriate authority. But I don't know the system specifications. Neither did I when I started here 22 years ago. I learned by asking questions and reading technical manuals. Another long silence. Where are the manuals? Equipment Library, Building C. Check them out from Janet in technical documentation. I hung up and went back to my assigned tasks, but I kept an eye on central line through the floor windows. Dylan was down there with a thick manual, a maintenance crew, and what looked like growing panic. At 7:50, the production horn sounded -3 long blasts followed by 2 short. That was the signal for line delay due to equipment failure. The first delay we'd had in 8 months. Dylan's manual session turned into a frantic conference. I could see him on his phone, probably calling Brad for guidance that Brad wasn't qualified to give. The maintenance crew stood around waiting for someone to make a decision they were authorized to make. At 8:15, they made the call to attempt repairs using the backup hydraulic system. It was the right technical decision, but it required someone with operational authority to sign off on the modified safety protocols. I watched Dylan sign the paperwork with the nervous energy of someone betting with money they couldn't afford to lose. The first chassis unit started processing at 8:45, 45 minutes behind schedule. The initial 12 units came through without incident. Then they hit chassis unit 2847-, an extended cab frame that required precise pressure calibration. Martinez was operating Press 3. Good worker, 9 years experience, but he'd never worked with a backup hydraulic system. Under normal circumstances, I would have been down there walking him through the process, explaining the differences in pressure curves and timing sequences. Instead, I was at my station completing my assigned documentation while Dylan supervised the operation with a technical manual and 2 days of management experience. The first sign of trouble was the sound, a grinding noise from the hydraulic pump that meant pressure was running outside optimal parameters. The second sign was the way the frame bent during forming, a slight warp that suggested uneven force distribution. I stood up and moved to the windows. This was going to go bad, and I could see it happening in real time. Chassis 284E7 was halfway through the forming process when the backup system couldn't maintain consistent pressure. The frame warped, jammed in the press, and triggered the emergency shutdown. But the damage was done. The hydraulic system was overloaded trying to force the warped metal, and something gave way with a sound like a gunshot. Martinez was operating the manual override when the pressure hose blew. High-pressure hydraulic fluid sprayed across the workstation, and Martinez, trying to get clear, slipped on the fluid and went down hard. His left hand got caught under the safety barrier just as the press cycled one final time. The emergency horn started immediately, long, continuous blasts that meant injury on the floor. All operations cease. Emergency response teams deploy. I was already moving before the horn finished its first cycle. 22 years on the floor teaches you that when someone's hurt, you respond first and worry about protocols later. But I stopped at the stairwell. Martinez was down. Dylan was in over his head. The entire central line was shut down. But this wasn't my zone. This wasn't my responsibility. This was what happened when you put someone in charge of operations. They didn't understand and implemented optimizations without understanding their consequences. I watched through the windows as paramedics worked on Martinez. Conscious, talking, probably broken fingers, but could have been much worse. The hydraulic system would need complete replacement. The production line would be down for at least 48 hours. And somewhere in corporate offices, people were making decisions about whether Ford Rouge was competent enough to handle the Toyota contract. My phone was ringing constantly now. Brad, plant management, union representatives, insurance investigators. Everyone wanting to know what happened, who was responsible, and what our response plan was. I let it ring. At 10:30, Brad showed up at my station. No greeting, just a man in crisis mode. "Stan, I need you down there now." "Need me for what?" "The union safety rep wants to interview someone with operational knowledge about the accident. Dylan's been trying to explain our procedures, but he doesn't know our procedures." "Look, this is a crisis. We need all hands." I looked at him calmly. "My hands are busy with my assigned responsibilities. If you need operational expertise for the investigation, you'll need to assign that task to someone with appropriate authority." Brad's face went red. "You're the senior operations person." "No, I'm not. Dylan is the operations manager. I'm assembly supervisor East Line. The accident happened on Central Line. This is about the promotion, isn't it?" "Fine, you want to talk about a raise. We can discuss it after we get through this crisis." I shook my head. "This isn't about money, Brad. This is about competence. You put someone in charge of operations who doesn't understand the job, told him to optimize procedures he'd never used, and now someone's in the hospital. That's not a personnel issue. That's a leadership failure." Brad stood there for a long moment, probably running through his options. Finally, "What do you want?" "I want you to handle the crisis you created, with the manager you appointed, and the procedures he recommended." Brad left without another word. Through the windows, I could see him heading back to the cluster of officials surrounding the accident scene. Dylan was there with his tablet and his manual, trying to answer questions about procedures he was learning as he went. Martinez was on his way to Detroit Medical. Central Line was closed indefinitely. The Toyota contract was in jeopardy. And somewhere in the Ford corporate hierarchy, people were asking serious questions about operational competence at Rouge plant. My phone showed 73 missed calls. I went to lunch. That afternoon, I sat in my truck in the parking lot, watching those 73 missed calls pile up. The autumn wind was rattling the windows, making the whole truck feel like it might blow away. But the real storm wasn't outside. It was happening in conference rooms where people were trying to explain how a routine production run had turned into a union grievance and a worker in the hospital. Patricia texted me around 2 p.m. "Heard there was an accident at the plant. You okay? Come home when you can. Made your favorite meatloaf." Smart woman. She knew when her husband needed comfort food and quiet conversation. My phone rang again. This time it was Grace Murphy from Ford Regional Management. Not Brad, not Dylan, but the woman who actually made decisions about plant operations and contract assignments. "Stan, we need you in the emergency management meeting." "Now, ma'am, I'm off duty. If this is work-related, you'll need to contact my supervisor. Your supervisor is part of the problem, Stan. We need someone who understands how this plant actually operates. I could hear the desperation in her voice, the same desperation Brad had been hiding behind corporate buzzwords all week. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The conference room was packed like a courtroom. Ford regional managers, union representatives, insurance investigators, safety inspectors, and Toyota contract executives on speakerphone. Brad sat at the table looking like someone watching his career get fed through a shredder. Dylan was conspicuously absent, probably at the hospital getting his story straight with lawyers. Grace Murphy called the meeting to order. We're here to determine whether Rouge Plant can continue operations under current management, or if we need emergency oversight. The Toyota representative spoke from the phone. We've been contracting with Rouge for 5 years without a major incident. Now we have 1 worker hospitalized and 48 hours of production delays. We need assurance that safety protocols are adequate and delivery schedules can be maintained. All eyes turned to Brad. He cleared his throat and started talking about comprehensive reviews and systematic improvements. Pure corporate speak designed to fill time while he figured out how to save his job. The safety inspector cut him off. Mr. Hoffman, our preliminary findings suggest that modified protocols contributed to this accident. Can you explain the rationale behind increasing press speeds without updating safety parameters? Brad looked like he'd been asked to explain quantum physics. Those modifications were recommended by our new operations manager as part of our efficiency initiatives. And where is this operations manager? Dylan is handling the immediate incident response. Grace Murphy leaned forward. Stan, you've been here 22 years. Walk us through what happened. I stood up and pulled out the folder I'd prepared during lunch. 3 days of documentation about every failure, missed protocol, and knowledge gap that had emerged since I'd stepped back from unofficial responsibilities. The accident was preventable, I said simply. It resulted from 3 critical failures: inadequate system knowledge, modified safety procedures without proper validation, and insufficient operational oversight. I walked them through the timeline. How Press 3's hydraulic issues had been flagged for weeks but never properly addressed because the person who understood the system wasn't officially responsible for it. How Dylan's efficiency improvements had eliminated redundant safety checks that existed specifically to prevent pressure system failures. The fundamental problem isn't equipment failure or worker error, I continued. It's a management structure that prioritizes credentials over competence and efficiency over safety. Brad tried to interrupt. Our new operational model was designed to streamline processes and improve productivity. Sir, with respect, your operational model was designed by someone who's never operated a press, never supervised a production line, and never had to explain to someone's family why they didn't come home from work. The room went dead quiet. The union representative spoke up. What would it take to restore operational safety and delivery schedules? Complete documentation of all safety procedures, mandatory hands-on training for all supervisory personnel, and operational oversight by someone with actual floor experience, not just MBA theory. Grace Murphy nodded. Would you be willing to take on that oversight role? I looked around the room, at Brad, who was staring at his hands, at the union rep, who was nodding approval, at the faces of people who were finally understanding that running an assembly plant wasn't the same as running a spreadsheet. I'd need full authority over safety protocols and production procedures. I'd need the operations manager position with real decision-making power, not advisory input. And I'd need compensation that reflects the actual responsibility. Grace Murphy smiled for the first time all day. Stan, Ford Regional is prepared to offer you the operations manager position, full authority over safety and production procedures. 25% salary increase effective immediately, plus adjustment pay for responsibilities you've been handling unofficially. I nodded once. I can work with that. The Toyota representative spoke from the phone. If Mr. Rodriguez is taking operational control, we're prepared to continue our contract and increase our volume by 20%. Brad stood up slowly. What about Dylan? Dylan can start as a production associate on East Line, I said. Learn press operations, safety protocols, and floor procedures. If he's serious about manufacturing management, he'll need to understand what he's managing from the ground up. 3 weeks later, I'm sitting in my actual office, the one with windows overlooking both east and central lines, watching the plant run the way it's supposed to. Smooth, safe, efficient. No emergency horns, no panic meetings, no last-minute heroics to prevent disasters that should never have been disasters. Dylan shows up every morning at 6:45 now. wearing work boots instead of dress shoes, learning press operations and safety procedures from the ground up. Turns out when you strip away the entitlement and force him to start from the bottom, he's not a bad kid. Just needed someone to teach him the difference between reading about manufacturing and actually making things. Martinez is back at work, hand-healed, with a story that gets more dramatic every time he tells it. Central Line is running better than ever, and the safety protocols we've implemented are being adopted as Ford corporate standards. But the best part came yesterday when Cole showed me his acceptance letter to University of Michigan, academic scholarship, engineering program. Turns out having a father who people respect for more than just fixing their problems opened doors I never knew existed. "Dad, I'm proud of you," Cole said as we looked over the letter together. "You stood up for what was right." "No, son, I just stopped doing what was wrong." There's a difference. That evening, sitting on the back porch, listening to the sound of the Rouge plant running third shift, I thought about the past month. How sometimes the hardest thing isn't proving you're qualified. It's making other people recognize they've been taking your qualifications for granted. I didn't have to fight for respect. I just had to stop giving it away for free. Now, every morning when I walk through those gates, people nod like they mean it. Not because I'm the guy who fixes their problems, but because I'm the guy who knows how to keep problems from happening in the first place. Sometimes justice isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's just the quiet satisfaction of watching people finally understand what they should have known all along. Your value doesn't decrease because someone fails to see it. It just waits quietly until reality forces them to notice. Sometimes the most powerful move isn't proving your worth. It's withdrawing it until others realize they can't function without you. Real leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about understanding that experience earned through years of solving real problems will always outweigh credentials earned in a classroom.